Well, howdy, product data professionals. We're back for another episode of IDA Optimize. Today, we're going to broadly cover a big topic, and that is 4 common PIM implementation challenges. The plan is to give you just an overview of what those challenges are, and then in subsequent sessions, we'll do a deeper dive. To help us along is Eli Cooley, president of IDA. Take it away, Eli.
Thanks, Joe. As Joe said, we're going to cover 4 common PIM implementation challenges. PIM is a product information management system. If we look across the world of product information right now, some PIMs are homegrown still to this day, typically amongst the market leaders and kind of the market laggards. Increasingly, third-party PIMs are being implemented for organizations that sell over 10,000 products. So some of the implementation challenges that we see are consistent across different PIMs. And some of those PIMs that you might hear of are Informatica, Stibo, EnterWorks, Riversand, the list goes on. But the challenges that we see tend to be consistent across just regardless of what PIM is being implemented. So these are universal challenges. The first is data modeling. So prior to implementing, it's really important to get the data model locked down. And this has one activity that can be very helpful here is logical data modeling. This pulls in stakeholders across the organization outside of IT and allows everyone to align on what the data model is going to be. Base variant is another common topic and challenge, which is if you think of a product being a pair of gloves, and the variants are the different sizes. So how is that configuration going to work? Is it going to be mandatory? Is it going to be optional? Is it going to be 1 tier, 2 tier, 3 tier? How does that work in terms of integrations and everything else? Third is a data dictionary. So making sure that we define thoroughly what all these different fields mean and whether they're allowed to be multi-valued and thinking ahead in terms of how everything's going to be defined. And lastly, pilot data. So it's really useful to move forward with maybe one category or a few small categories of products and work them all the way through so that we can see the outcome prior to trying to push the entire catalog into the PIM. The next common challenge is data optimization. So this is where there's a lot of work that goes into data optimization as we've defined it here because it includes the migration. So the first thing is the design environment. Before you get into the PIM, where are you going to normalize and assemble all of this data and normalize it and QA it and get it ready to be loaded to the PIM? It's surprising, some PIMs are still using Excel load sheets in Excel, or it's the responsibility of their client to supply them with the CSV files that get loaded to the PIM. So think about where you're going to design the data that goes into the PIM. Sometimes these might be called pre-PIMs, and a lot of the PIM implementers have their own design environment. Competitive benchmarking, who are you tracking against from a competitive perspective? When we're looking to make sure that that we have the information that our customers need, that we have the attributes that they need, who are you benchmarking against, and what does that process look like to benchmark against your competitors and close those gaps? Third would be the actual process of ETL, extract, transform, and load, and normalizing the content. This is where a lot of the work is. So you may have one or more legacy systems that you're merging together to load to PIM, and that data typically needs to be normalized. And that's where we start to develop some of the rules and style guidelines that we're going to use later for governance. And lastly, data fill. So when we migrate all of our legacy data in, it's going to leave gaps. It always happens that there's missing data as we move the data into a new data model, and that's typically a project just by itself to fill in all of those missing data points. If you think about a catalog with 100,000 items, and every item has, let's just say 10 attributes. Just right there, you're looking at 1 million data points, and some of our customers are looking at tens of millions of data points to manage. And filling in all those data points can be very large projects. Next challenge is data governance. So how are we going to govern this data once we have it in the PIM? So one key there is workflow. Every PIM has a slightly different workflow, but there is going to be a change between your workflow today and the workflow in your new PIM, and thinking through how that workflow is going to work is a big part of governance. But beyond workflow and beyond setting up workflow and permissions in your PIM, what are we going to use to actually govern the data quality of that's in the PIM? And that's where style guidelines come in. So style guidelines can be rules, they can be preferred terminology, but building out those style guidelines and ratifying those style guidelines so that they can be used by the organization. Next is data quality metrics. What metrics are we going to track? There's hundreds of data quality metrics that we could potentially leverage. Attribute fill rates, image rates, description uniqueness would be some really common ones. But what are the metrics that we're going to track? How are we going to track them? Who's going to be looking at the reports? And how are we going to manage these reports over time? And lastly is the program itself. So what does it take to set up a governance program? What does it mean to have a governance council? What do the data stewards do within the data governance program? How do escalations work? Do we need a charter? These are the kinds of things that we think about when setting up a governance program. The last challenge is implementation partners. So thinking through the accountability between the PIM company itself and their implementation partner. There's a reason why they decouple, and it's important to think about who's accountable for different aspects of the implementation and anticipate where we might have challenges. The worst thing we can have is when things devolve into finger pointing between the implementation partner and the PIM company, where the implementation partner is almost acting as a shield for the PIM company themselves. Very common for that scenario to play out when things aren't going well. Integrations are really important. So it's how are we going to integrate with a vendor portal? How are we going to integrate with syndication requirements to downstream partners? How are we going to integrate with the e-commerce platform and get this data to the website? There's a lot to think through there. How PIM is going to integrate in all these different directions. Customizations and upgrades. These can often come as surprises in a PIM implementation. So what constitutes a customization versus out of the box? What does it mean that something's a customization for maintenance moving forward? What does it mean that I have customizations when upgrades come out? How often are upgrades going to enter my world? Just not getting caught by surprise by customizations and upgrades. And lastly, making sure that service level agreements are built into the contract. So these are things like uptime, tech support, potentially performance factors. And it's really important to have SLAs set up in your contracts. So this is a high level overview of 4 common challenges. We intend to deep dive on each of these. Hopefully this is helpful or useful if you're either thinking about implementing a PIM, in the process of implementing a PIM, or have already implemented a PIM.
Thank you, Eli, for all that wonderful content about some really important areas when implementing PIM. I know personally, I look forward to the session around the implementation partners, having worked on both sides of that equation. And I think there's some good practices we can discuss about keeping all parties invested and engaged through an implementation. We know that sometimes things can go a little sideways in projects, and it's important to set the right expectations and hold folks accountable. That concludes today's session of IDA Optimized. Remember to like, share, and comment, and stay tuned. We're going to be doing some deep dives into these 4 topics in the very near future. Thank you, Eli.
Thanks, Joe.